Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into something really compelling and I think incredibly relevant right now. It's this question. How can legal frameworks, the ones designed with the best intentions, aiming to protect vulnerable communities, how can they sometimes get used in ways that seem totally contradictory to why they were created in the first place?
It's a real puzzle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's brought into sharp focus by cases like Mahmoud Khalil's. He's a Palestinian graduate student, and he ended up being held for, over 100 days in LaSalle, that detention center in Louisiana. And this is despite us having anti-hate laws that should theoretically prevent exactly that kind of profiling.
Yeah, that's a stark contrast. It really makes you stop and think. So, okay, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how this happens. How do these laws, the source material we looked at describes them as forged in the righteous fires of civil rights. How do they get, weaponized? How do they lead to outcomes like Mahmoud Khalil being detained for essentially protesting? And we're going to use this really interesting metaphor from the research to help us understand the law as a forge.
It's a great metaphor, actually. A forge, it's all about heat and pressure shaping raw material.
Right.
But the fire, the process itself, it's neutral. It doesn't care if you're making a sword or a horseshoe or, something else entirely. And the idea here is that laws, once they're written down, once they're codified, they become these neutral tools, like a chess piece, as the source puts it. It just sits there on the board. The law doesn't ask about your politics or your religion. It's just there, ready to be interpreted and used by whoever's in power.
Okay, so if the law's just a tool, like that chess piece, how did we get these specific tools? Because the history here is really important, right? Our research points out that for, the last 60 years, society's been deliberately forging laws to protect specific groups. We're talking Black Americans, Jewish Americans, women, LGBTQIA folks, immigrants, refugees, students, people who don't speak English as a first language. And the examples given are huge. Brown versus Board of Education, Title IX, the Civil Rights Act, the Hate Crime Statistics Act.
Yeah, landmark legislation.
Exactly. And these didn't just appear out of thin air. They came from, really profound historical pain and injustice. Holocaust museums, lynching trees, segregated water fountains. That whole history gives this kind of legislation almost a sacred weight, you could say.
Absolutely. The original idea, the driving force, was exactly that: to shape a society where the most vulnerable are protected. That's the quote from the material. A really noble goal. But, and this is the critical point the analysis raises, there was maybe an oversight, or maybe it's just how laws work. Once they exist, they're out there. Anyone can potentially pick them up and use them. And how they get used can change dramatically depending on the political winds, the social climate, sometimes completely separate from that original good intention.
Right. So let's make this concrete. How does this neutral tool idea apply to Mahmoud Khalil's situation? He's a green card holder, right? He was involved in pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. Seems like pretty standard free speech activity on the surface.
You'd think so. But what the material we looked at suggests is that in the political atmosphere of 2025, specifically under a hypothetical second Trump administration described in the source, these protests got reframed. They stopped being seen as just protected speech. Instead, they got labeled as foreign agitation, extremism, even dangerous.
Okay, so the interpretation shifted. What legal tool did they actually use against him then? This is the part I found really surprising.
Yeah, it's pretty startling. They apparently reached back and dusted off a Cold War-era immigration statute, a law that was originally put in place to stop Soviet spies getting into the U.S.
Wow, from that long ago.
And according to the research, that was the law used to arrest him, detain him, and try to deport him. And the basis was his crime, displaying signs and slogans, giving a speech.
Just for words and signs, that level of irony is, it's significant.
It really is. The most powerful irony, the thing that really stands out in the analysis, is that this happened, this is a direct quote again, under the same set of laws that were passed to prevent people like Mahmoud from being profiled and detained without cause. It's a complete flip. The shield becomes a sword, depending on who's holding it and how they interpret the threat.
And this connects to another key idea in our deep dive material, the words are violence era. This concept really took hold over the past decade or so, didn't it? Establishing this idea that speech itself can cause harm and that institutions, like universities, have a duty to protect vulnerable people from that harm. We saw it everywhere. Safe spaces, trigger warnings, professors getting into trouble for causing emotional distress.
Yeah, comedians getting banned from campuses, that sort of thing.
Right. All driven by that core premise.
And, initially, there were some clear positive results from that shift. People engaging in harassment got expelled. Openly racist or misogynistic speech faced real consequences. People were held accountable.
Yeah.
But, and here's the turn highlighted in the source, things got complicated. Suddenly, intent no longer mattered, interpretation was weaponized, and vulnerability was currency. It's like this system, designed for protection, developed some unintended side effects.
Which brings us straight to this concept the research calls the boomerang effect. This is fascinating. The idea is, okay, you build a legal or policy tool powerful enough to shut down, say, a KKK rally. Well, the analysis warns don't be shocked when someone else picks up that exact same powerful tool and uses it to shut down a Gaza teach-in, for instance. It's the nature of the tool itself. Once it exists, its use isn't controlled solely by the creator's intentions. You throw it out there, maybe with righteous aims, and then years down the line you see it coming back, but as the source puts it, with a different logo on it.
Yeah, and connecting that boomerang idea to what's happening now, or what the source projects for 2025. You see those same rules, the same logic, being used to potentially silence pro-Palestinian solidarity, to challenge academic freedom, to justify deporting a green card holder for protesting. And it's not presented as an isolated incident. The findings mention others. Rumeysa Öztürk, detained allegedly for foreign interference. Mohsen Madawi, questioned over citizenship fraud claims. Faculty members facing discipline under anti-Semitism clauses for what they argue is pro-Palestinian activism. It's presented as a pattern.
The same framework, just aimed differently.
Yeah.
And the source gives such a clear example of this boomerang effect right there. It points out when Jewish students today express feeling unsafe when they hear the phrase "from the river to the sea," they are effectively using the very same kinds of policies and arguments that were once established to protect, say, queer students from hateful protests like those by the Westboro Baptist Church.
Right. The underlying logic is similar, claiming harm from speech.
And the state, or the institution, listens. Which leaves you with this really difficult question. Is this justice playing out? Is it just deep irony? Or, as the analysis asks rather pointedly, is it just the inevitable consequence of turning every disagreement into a matter of policy and every policy into a weapon?
I think that's the core takeaway, really.
Yeah.
What the analysis strongly suggests is that these powerful laws, even the ones forged with truly righteous, protective goals, they are, at the end of the day, neutral tools. How they're used, the impact they have, that changes. It evolves depending on who's wielding them and the political and social context they're wielded in.
So we want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to chew on from this deep dive. It's a powerful one from the source material. Every law, once it's enacted, becomes like that chess piece on the board of history. So what does it really mean for us as a society when the tools we create specifically for protection can be so easily repurposed? And maybe more importantly, how can we even begin to anticipate or maybe navigate these kinds of inevitable consequences as we continue to forge new laws today?